Rebecca, Minister of Environment for Alberta. First of all, thank you for being here. I'm thrilled to have you. I've been wanting to have you for quite a while. I'm a massive fan of yours. Why did you decide to get into politics?
I had always loved politics, and in a previous life, I worked in politics as a staffer. So I'm originally from Saskatchewan. I worked for Premier Brad Wall when he was the Premier at the time.
Okay.
And I was just really inspired by his ability to show how you can, as a politician, change the outcome of a province for its people. You can take their greatest hopes and aspirations, or in some cases their biggest frustrations, and really make a difference for the people living there. I always wanted to live in Alberta, and so I had been living in Alberta for a few years and saw the devastating impacts of anti-industry, anti-economy policies on this amazing province, and was really compelled to run because of that.
There's not a lot of separation between Indigenous communities and oil and gas. So they're interconnected. They're involved in these symbiotic relationships. And when you're here and you see a lot of the environmental reclamation and you see how hard we work, why is it important to protect that, but also encourage industries so the economy, you can have schools, and there's money for programs, there's economic activity. How do you manage both worlds?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And especially in a province like Alberta, where our economy is so dependent on natural resources, and so many people make their livelihoods in the resource-based industries, whether that be energy or agriculture, you name it. And so this is something that it has to happen together. And I think, just exactly as you said, Fort McMurray is such a great example of that. We were here today, actually, just this afternoon on site, out at a reclaimed tailings pond. And I felt very strongly about that because I still remember touring that site. I guess it probably would have been in 2019 or 2020. And it's such a great example of how industry really does work to test, and not only from a land reclamation side, but same thing as water quality and ensuring our water is safe, making sure that our industry is holding itself to our high environmental standards that we have here. It benefits our reputation as a responsible energy producer of choice, but it's also the right thing to do for the people who live in and around the community, including First Nations and Métis people, who I know also benefit from jobs and the economy, but also want to make sure that, just as we do, that we are stewarding our environment for generations to come.
How does it make you feel as the environment minister, the provincial environment minister, when you have the former environment minister just attacking all of the good work we do here in Alberta and trying to limit us from growth, trying to stop us from expanding, to put a time limit on our community and our industry? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that is so exceptionally frustrating. Being in this role for the last couple of years, one of my biggest frustrations is the federal government's lack of understanding about what actually happens here. I think in some cases they've created this narrative, and I've called it a pretty radical activist narrative that they have in their mind about what energy production looks like. And that's really not the case. I think you're exactly right. It's been so frustrating to have governments and environment ministers at the federal level just not wanting to hear that other side of the story. And so I do think we have a responsibility to share that message, especially with, the federal government's new legislation that bans industry from talking about some of those successes. I see that as something that we can also help with, is partnering with communities and telling that story and showing what is really happening out there in industry.
Being that the microscope and the magnifying glass and everything is on us all the time, how do we, to your point, take that message about all the good things that we're doing in Alberta, considering we literally carry the economy of this entire country? How do we get the message so they help us succeed?
Yeah, I would say our Premier has been very clear that, while the industry was under attack by that greenwashing bill, we will happily tell the story of our industry. It really is, I think, a detriment to the great work our industry is doing. And now we have a federal government who says, we're going to be Canada's going to be an energy superpower. Canada can't be an energy superpower without the oil sands.
No.
Absolutely. It is driving the economy of Alberta, of Canada, provides jobs, not only directly in this area, but right across Canada in a variety of sectors. And so I do think we have an opportunity here to share that message. I know I certainly do. I take that message every time I meet with the environment ministers. Most recently, we were in Northwest Territories. We were talking a lot about water. And I'm quite proud of the work being done in this region, especially with the oil sands monitoring program. We have some of the most extensive monitoring in any industry right here in this area, making sure that we understand the impacts of development and that we're able to mitigate any of those impacts quickly, efficiently, and work with industry and community to do that. And so we have a really great story to tell, and we definitely, as a government, take the opportunity to do that any chance we get.
Now, we've talked about Fort McMurray, talked about the oil sands. What are some environmental concerns that you'd like to address all around Alberta?
Yeah, some of my, the biggest files that I'm working on right now do involve water. So this fall, we're going to be opening up the Water Act, which hasn't been opened up in 25 years. We've seen a few very dry years. So we had some drought and water conservation, making sure that we have enough water, both for the people who are choosing to call Alberta home, to protect our ecosystems, but also to support industry growth and municipal growth. Of course, continuing to push back on this federal government with their anti-economy, anti-energy industry pieces of legislation and regulation that are on the table, supporting our premier on that. We have this prime minister who says that he wants us to be an energy superpower again, but we still have all of these pieces of quite radical activist environmental policies on the table, from the oil and gas emissions cap to the clean electricity regulations, their net zero power grid regulations. We have a tanker ban off the East Coast. We have Bill C-69 still in place. And so these are policies that we're going to continue to fight and stand up for our industry and really push for reasonable standards that industry can meet. Methane is another good example. We keep hearing that the federal government is going to come out with some new methane regulations. Well, we've been able to reduce methane emissions, hit our goals. Industry hit their goals, really, with over 53% emissions reduction. And they did that, saving themselves $600 million than if they had done things the way that the federal government wanted to do them. And that's because the federal government doesn't understand energy development. It's not part of their jurisdiction. So our government will continue to defend Alberta's constitutional jurisdiction over energy and resource development.
Where do you see Alberta in the next 4 to 5 years? And what's your ambitions politically beyond this? Do you have anything you want to be the prime minister? What are you looking at?
Oh gosh, well, I always say in politics, timing is everything. And so I don't think it's ever kind of a linear path. I didn't expect to be in this role as environment minister. This is something that the premier asked me to serve as, and I love this job. I love that it is so exceptionally complicated, and oftentimes you are working to put together almost a puzzle, right? You have all of these pieces that need to fit into place just right. And I would say that they are complicated policies that impact the future of our province, both from an environmental perspective, but also an economic perspective and an investment perspective. And so that's one of the things I love most. So I always say it's hard to tell, but I really enjoy public service, and it's been something that's been rewarding, challenging, but quite frankly, the honor of a lifetime. And what's next for Alberta? I have such high hopes for our province. I think we saw a time where there was so much attack on our province and our major industries. We still see that from our federal government, but I think there's optimism in that it seems like the views of Canadians are shifting. I think that there is recognition that demand for energy is not decreasing. It increases every single day. And if people around the world are looking for safe, affordable, reliable energy, we have it. And I think Canadians too also recognize the importance of a strong Canadian economy. I think that is probably a benefit of some of the uncertainty with some of the policies we're seeing out of the United States, especially around tariffs, is the importance of having diverse markets for our exports and having that strong economy. And I think that recognition shows Canadians, not just Albertans, but how important our province and our industries are to the future of Canada as a country. And so I have a lot of optimism. I also am always optimistic because I think Albertans are special. I think the people here are unique. And it really comes down to this entrepreneurial spirit that when they see a challenge, they just roll up their sleeves to figure out, how do we solve this? What is next? How do we innovate? How do we do better? How do we meet what the world is looking for right now? And how do we make our communities a better place? And so that's why I'm optimistic in Alberta, and I'm just honored to be part of a government who's here to help support that.